Hello everyone and welcome to a guide or overview of Zhatan the Black of the Chaos Dwarfs. So I played through the initial turns and got a sense for the faction. These are my conclusions on how they play, strengths and weaknesses. As always, this is not an in-depth guide or overview, but it should help you out making your own decisions. Without further ado, let's play then with Zhatan the Black. For your short victory, you need to control the settlements of the Bastion, basically the Turtle Gate, the Dragon Gate, and the Snake Gate. So control the Bastion, that's your task. Then we need to destroy the faction of the Northern Provinces, so Miao Ying, we're going after you. Then also occupy, loot, razor, sack 35 different settlements. Very straightforward campaign, just go into the Bastion, conquer the Bastion, go through it, go over to Cathay, it should be nice. Achieving this will give you major relic missions becoming available. A workload requirement for raw materials is minus 15%, and raw materials consumed per turn by buildings is also minus 15%. Very straightforward, good to have all these buffs, more on that in terms of the mechanics, but yeah. In terms of the long campaign victory, you need to achieve the short victory conditions, occupy, loot, razor, sack 80 different settlements, quite a lumped amount. You need to then hold the following settlement of Zanagrun, so you need to conquer this one. It's very difficult in the beginning because it's a tier 5. And then we need to destroy the factions of Karazakarak, so Thorgrim. We need to also conquer Karak Kadrin, which is for Ungrim, and then the Gringor's Ardboys. So pretty straightforward, like obviously you're gonna start with Grimgor, then you're going to proceed over here into the mountains. It's going to take a while. It's about the shortest short victory, but the longest long victory for the Chaos Dwarfs. Now, achieving this, the reward is 3 items, 3 legendary items, all with their uses. So it's really great. I wish there were more rewards like this, because it's always very thematic and always helps. Now, Zhatan the Black, he has a blackened heart, a blackest soul. He's basically what he brings to the table is that he has a maximum number of active convoys +1, so you have 1 extra convoy to work with, which is really great. It's a great ability. And then the recruitment cost for artillery and war machine units, which are kind of like the more expensive units that you can get, is halved. So it's really great to put the perspective in this regard to ensure that you can always get those artillery and war machine units and go into that playstyle. In terms of climates, there's no issue. You can conquer anywhere. Great for a domination campaign. In fact, I cannot wait to do a full map completion with this faction or with the Chaos Dwarfs in general, because it's really good for it. So your starting location is actually a 3-settlement province, and you begin with 2 settlements already, which is quite a great start. You should be able to complete the province very quickly with the first battles, and then you proceed to your goals. So typical expansion is very simple. Control these chaos wastes to the north, and then go forth into the Bastion, or already go forth into the Bastion, but of course you may want to have some domination here or completion here before proceeding to the Bastion, and then of course take over Cathay and control the Cathay areas. So yeah, that's sort of the general theme. Of course, should you then conquer this area, why not proceed to the long campaign victory? Maybe then you can proceed with the opening a secondary front. Notice how defensible this is, because of course it has a nice choke point here. No one's going to pass through you, so even just an army around this area, if you need to defend, is pretty sufficient for quite a long time. So yeah, you should have no issues defending this place. So, you are Chaos aligned, so other Chaos factions, Norska Beastmen, they might help you out. Skaven is likely to, especially as you fight their enemies, but here's the tricky part. You start at war with some Chaos factions. You kind of need to control some of their lands and to fight them, so you're not going to have too many friends afterwards, and especially after getting some, just wrecking some of their lands, the other Chaos factions may not like it. So it's kind of a tricky situation that you're in. The typical allies are also the ones that you're going to have to fight against. Now, Later on, of course, you're going to be fighting mostly the Order Tide, you know, like Cathay, for instance, and the Dwarves, etc. Some Ogres, for sure. So, the sort of ideas that maybe you can go with some Norse outposts and some Skaven outposts, those are likely to become your friends as well. And, of course, getting some monsters or some weapons themes does seem like a good idea. But it's not the easiest faction to determine what your allies are going to be, because, of course, you actually started warring those typical allies that you may have, you know, Norskans and the Chaos forces. So in terms of mechanics, there's plenty of them. First, we have the 3 unique settlement types. You have the towers, which can only be built in province capitals. Then you have the outposts, or the mines, as I like to call them, and the factories. So basically, you have to choose these ones because they, of course, focus on different ones. Now, and this is related to the unique resources. I'm going to talk about the unique resources because it's much easier to explain than the different settlements. All of them, you should note, have different building trees, so that should be important as well to know. Now, we have the 4 unique resources. So laborers, they are required via battles or convoys, and they are required to give you raw materials. That's the sole purpose of it. You should give them, you should ensure that you get enough labor to meet your workload. Workload is basically, you know, how much labor force how much of a labor force do you need to keep the mines at 100% efficiency. That's basically how it works. And what you build on the mines, you actually produce raw materials. Now, these raw materials, mainly produced via mines, they're used to construct buildings, convert into armaments, or even treasury. Armaments are basically what you need to use at the Hellforge to increase unit caps or to improve your units. There's also some buildings that require those, so you always need to maintain a healthy economy by, you know, having a surplus of gold, of laborers, of raw materials, and armaments. And finally, you have conclave influence. This is basically by having towers, okay, and, you know, by settlement buildings that generate, and this is used at the Tower of Za in order to occupy seats. More on that later. Okay, so now that we have this under wraps, what do we do? So, because every different settlement type has its own building tree, you should really familiarize yourself with those trees to ensure that you know all the ins and outs, okay? As you can see, for instance, advanced military always requires, look at the construction costs, it's armaments. This always requires raw materials, see? And these ones require gold. So you have to invest in both, or in all of those types to ensure that you get a healthy economy. You don't have any growth. Growth is actually how many laborers you can keep bringing in. And then you can decide on that same labor economy menu if you want to have more laborers there, if you don't, and it relates to the control as well. So be wary of all those intricacies here. Now, so the Hellforge, let's speak about the others. The Hellforge. Hellforge is basically the unit caps system. So you can invest armaments to increase the unit caps of specific units, and then of course by the time that you reach a specific level here, as you're increasing the unit caps, they get some different effects, which is always nice. So it gives you some different effects. The units become really powerful, and adding to those, then of course that you unlock, then you can add those here. Okay, so you can add the forgecraft options. For instance, I can give all these melee infantry the frenzy, which is always nice, or I can give them later on sundering attacks. So that's always good to have in mind. It's a good system to ensure that your units are always very powerful, but do note that in accordance to every unit, you're going to have quite a lot of upkeep, so be wary of that. Now, a very wonderful system, of course, to keep your forces very powerful. Then we have the Tower of Za. So this is to use those conclave influence points, as you see there. And it's divided into 1, 2, 3, 4 segments, and each of one with 3 districts. Okay, so the idea here is that, for instance, for the industry district, once every single seat has been occupied, every single faction from the Chaos Dwarfs receives the raw materials output and the armaments output there. Okay, so currently, for instance, I have this income from settlement buildings plus 25%. I decided on taking those, but by all means, someone can steal it. As you can see, it costs 112 to usurp this seat. So if another faction would gain this and I wanted to usurp it, I could pay a little bit more conclave influence to usurp them from that seat. So it's always an interesting idea. I could go for the casualty replenishment rate. I didn't feel it was necessary, or the armaments cost. Really, you should invest in checking it a little bit here. It's kind of like a second tech tree, really. And in the end, the main options is that you get to confederate. That's the confederation option with the other factions of the Chaos Dwarfs, which is a cool mechanic. You know, as you increase in the influence here, then you achieve the conclave, and then you can finish up by confederating those other factions. Really cool. Now, labor actions. Let me speak about the labor actions. I forgot. So it's you can spend 200 laborers there to gain conclave influence 10, and then you can spend it to gain treasury, or you can spend it to gain control. So all of this is just basically to ensure that, like you said, an example, if you have a surplus of laborers, why not just improving your province overall? Another use for laborers is to rush construction. You can spend laborers, tell them to build it faster, and they will, which is great, so that your settlements can actually build up really fast because of it. If you have a surplus of laborers, in essence, if you have a surplus of laborers, you can do anything. It's really good. So the more laborers you get, the better. And finally, let's speak about the military convoys. Now, this is similar to Cathay caravans. You send out a convoy to exchange one currency for another. Right now, I'm exchanging gold for raw materials, and in another place I'm exchanging gold for laborers. So as they go in, you're gonna get some overall threats, some events that will jump up. So it's a great way to meet other factions, of course, but at the same time you're gonna have to keep an eye on them. They're gonna be having some fights to do, some events. It's a very interesting mechanic, one that I'm glad that they didn't set it up only for Cathay, that you actually get also with the Chaos Dwarfs, and it's really cool to use. So as you can see, plenty of different mechanics, which makes the campaign quite friendly. It's really, you're always having to do something, which is really cool. It's really nice, and it synergizes well, and that's all that we actually enjoy. So in terms of edicts, you have the rush construction labor cost minus 10%, and construction cost minus 10% for all buildings, always good when you're building up. Then you have minus recruitment cost and more recruitment rank plus 2, it's still not negligible, so beware. Then we have income from refinery buildings and armaments output plus 10%. This is always helpful if you, of course, have factories in that location. And then you have the control and lesser chance of a plague spreading, of course, pretty straightforward. Quite thematic, allowing some decision in terms of economy, growth factors. Really like those. Then we have the army stances, and one notorious one is that the fact that they actually have underway as well. So it allows fast travel between difficult terrain, all the tactical advantages. Be careful, of course, of being intercepted. That's the main one. Then we have in camp, so of course taking 50% movement range and immune to most attrition and enables replenishment is always nice. Then we have raiding, which adds the fact that you gain labor from it, so it's really good as a source of labor as well, other than the income. And of course, always note that you need 50% movement points to engage in this. And then we have ambush, the typical ambush and forced march, so 25%, and then gaining 50% of movement. So all in all, very good choices, allowing strategic options with the underway, and always ensuring good replenishment when needed. Yeah, really cool. So in terms of buildings, there's a lot to talk about. There's a special building in your capital, which is the Drill Forgecraft building. Basically, it gives you income, raw materials, armaments, all the good stuff, as well as recruitment as well in the beginning for Chaos Dwarf units. Always good. So you have the 3 types of settlements. Let's start with the towers. It's required for your advanced military buildings that also cost armaments, remember. In terms of infrastructure, you have a Lord and Hero recruit rank faction-wide improvement, casualty replenishment rate, which is always nice, a very basic income building. Then we have a control in adjacent provinces and control building, and also campaign movement range, which is always helpful. Then we have the raw materials consumed per turn by buildings minus 50%. This is cool, especially in provinces that are like 4 settlement or 3 settlement like this one. It may prove useful as well. Then we have a conclave gained 10%. Don't forget about this, because this later on helps you out so much. Diplomatic relations, recruit rank for pole centers and winds of magic by reserve. Sorry if I read it in a different manner. And then of course the defensive is buildings here. So good choices, of course. Then we have the outposts. Outposts can only go to level 3, of course. But they're the main source of raw materials. That's via this building here, the mines. Raw materials per turn, and it does require some workload, so be wary of that. Okay. Then you do have the income building, which of course always useful. Then we have a campaign line of sight and control. Not really that useful, but well, okay, I guess we can take it. You know, it may be useful in choke points to ensure that you can see the enemy coming. And then note that it only has one military building, which you can only go for hobgoblins in the mines, in the outposts. Then we have the factory. It's a main source of converting raw materials into armaments. So as you can see by the main assembly line here, reduce the raw materials in exchange for armaments. It also provides some chaos and divided corruption. Now it has more military, so it even has an advanced military, so you can go up to infernal guards, which is really great. It's a great unit. And you can go to Deathstreak rocket launchers and Hell cannons, as well as the magma cannons, Iron demons, you know, and the skull crackers. The only thing that you don't get is actually the Dreadquake mortars. But that is useful, so that you can get, you know, even on the minor settlements, quite decent units, and even specifically the Infernal Castellan Hero, so it's quite cool. So the main building, we talk about it, it's the assembly line for armaments in exchange for raw materials. Then we have a income building, but this one costs raw materials, so be wary of that, okay? While in the mines it doesn't, but this one costs. Then we have a raw materials output plus 30%. So there's arguments whether or not, you know, having at least one factory, especially in those 4 settlement provinces, if having at least one factory is worth it because of this building alone. But it's up to you to have that idea or not. Remember that you always have to consider the other stuff that you can build there, you know, so, you know, it's up to you, really. So the construction costs range from actually costing gold, okay, as you can see there, to costing raw materials, to costing armaments. Always remember that. I mentioned it already, but by all means it should be mentioned severely because it's important to have in mind. Now, in terms of research, divided into 3: industry, sorcery, and military. So industry helps your economy mostly. Okay, basically helps your economy. Be aware that some of them requires the specific numbers of raw materials there. Then we have sorcery, which requires sometimes some conclave points. For the most part, this is campaign stuff really, and helps with magic as well, so you know, have that aware. It's good for the diplomatic relations that you can see there, so yeah. And then we have military. Military helps with, of course, you're upgrading your units, some campaign buffs throughout. It's quite important to keep a nice balance here. Or you can try to beeline specifics. You know, you maybe want a very strong initial force of hobgoblins, so maybe you go for that. You know, maybe you just want to really invest immediately into Chaos Dwarf units, so you go for that. It's really up to you. They have very good synergies. The main idea is that you're rewarded for having a plan. This is something that you really need with the Chaos Dwarfs. You know, have a plan, have an idea. I'm going to build this, build that, in order to get this, to get that conclave. You know, that sort of idea helps a lot. And then you adapt to any changes while they conduct that plan. You know, that's what I would like to bring up, especially that you always should plan it out a little bit. You know, and then you build up on the plan. Speaking of Lord skills, we have our Lord specific skills, of course. Then we have the yellow line or caster line. In this case, Zhatan is not a caster, so be wary of that. You also have the blue line or campaign or red line or army. Starting with the blue line, you do have replenishment rate and reduced attrition right at the start. It's excellent. I always like to take it. One less problem with this army, you know. However, given how Chaos Dwarfs have no issues with climate, it also appears a little bit redundant, so I'm unsure. You also have an increase of battle loot as well, and labor is gained per turn, so this will likely be the second one that I'm going to take, unless I see there's some difficulties and I need something on the red line or something on the yellow line. So yeah, that's overall how I would work. Now the red line is quite good. It grants good buffs to specific units, complements the forces and corrects most weaknesses, like it gives melee attack for the melee infantry units, which literally have it a little bit lower. So it is quite expensive in terms of the amount of red line skills to fill different unit types, but all of your troops are of such high quality that it's kind of unmanageable. So it helps to note how the both low and high quality troops of the same time are buffed by the same red line skill. This helps so that you can you can start with the basic archers and you can move up the chain without any issues. You can always benefit from having selected that skill earlier on. So nearly all of their unit types have amazing success in battle, so you can field quite a variety of different armies. Either focus on artillery or range, or even just a melee powerhouse, or combinations of both. So let's get to it. Zhatan does not have any specific bonuses for anything, you know. Reduced upkeep here, just enemy leadership there, this is important, and armor leadership and melee defense for the whole army. So basically you're more tanky and they are not. That whole idea helps, you know, consolidate some of the ideas here. So thematically, war machines and artillery are his ideas, so here are some combinations with those. Nothing wrong with the strong front line, some missile focus, and then of course the artillery units there, you know, some iron demons just for good measure. Or you can go in the same idea with the front line, but still with some cavalry focus, and then a mobile force of war machines, which is always nice. Notice how they are quite ineffective in terms of red line skills, but remember that Zhatan is not a caster, so he can certainly go for it without any issue. Then we also have maybe the same idea with a good front line, but with the Kadai units in the midst, you know, punching through the front line, assistance from the flyers to catch anything that shouldn't be there, and of course the Dreadquake mortars to even cause a further punch there. That's the sort of idea. I want you to think in terms of the units, how they can synergize with one another in battle, and that's the sort of thought process here. Now, we can have a few more possibilities, of course, like a more dwarf style with heavy infantry, missiles, and artillery, you know, that works really well, or instead of the artillery, we just add the mobility of the bull centaurs. It's also important to note about the cap system, so it'll incentive to have some armies that use different units, as you can see here. So, always good to have a more mobile force without relying too much on the artillery, or even just, you know, a very standardized, you know, with everything, you know, cavalry, artillery, missile infantry, and infantry, but note how expensive it is in terms of red line skills, you know. Basically, with the cap system, you're also incentive to have some sweeper armies, and it's totally possible to have some hobgoblin based armies as well, because they do become quite good, especially with the legendary hero. By the way, if you get the legendary hero in an army, just get some hobgoblins, they'll be crazy good. And these are more for sweeper armies, you know, taking advantage of the remaining, you know, unit caps that you may still have. Then of course, by all means, you can field these guys well into the late game. They're very powerful in themselves. So basically that's what I have to offer you. You know, some different compositions. Note, always remember how if you go into different types of units, you're going to have to spend a little bit more in red line skills. Not have to. You may skip the red line entirely, but the purpose of this is precisely to focus a little bit of the synergy in that regard. So in terms of heroes, I always recommend, you know, that you have at least one caster in the army, one support hero and one melee hero, you know, that sort of idea. But feel free to have several or none, it's really up to you. Just ensure that you have fun with it, you know. So Zhatan has a great starting position, and assaulting the bastion yourself is always a nice premise. Build up your forces, take the bastion, go into Cathay, and turn all those lovely trees into mines. A bit of focus into war machines and artillery is always nice, particularly noting that recruitment costs, and I advise you to embrace it at least thematically. That way you always have something different to expect when playing as Zhatan. Now, your army consists of strong holding infantry, great missiles and artillery, great cavalry, good monstrous infantry, great single entities and flyers, lacks some speed, and you require time to build up. This is the main premise here. Replenishment is great, mainly because of the climate and how most lords have access to replenishment as well. So I guess now it's time to turn all of Cathay into your laborers as Zhatan the Black.